We now know how to handle a specific exception that might take place in our application or an exception that we ourselves throw. But there might be a situation when an exception takes place and we did not handle that. In that case, if exception takes place and you don't have an exception handler for that, you will get a standard exception, and let me bring the browser window to show you how it will look like. So if an exception takes place and you do not have a handle for that, this is the structure of that exception message that a calling client should receive in response to their API call. But if you have started customizing your error message structure, you have added more fields and you want other fields to be included into this JSON as well, there is a way to handle any other exception, so that even if a general 500 exception takes place or a null pointer exception takes place and you do not have handle for that, you can still catch that exception and return a custom JSON or XML representation. So let's go back here into our controller advice and add one more exception handler method, which will handle all other exceptions that we did not handle so far. And again, just to remind you that if you wanted one exception handler to handle multiple exceptions, let's say you want to have two exceptions that you want to handle with a single method, you can always put a comma here and add one more exception class that you wanted to handle. For example, let's say I want this method to handle a null pointer exception as well. So I will have to add null pointer exception after the comma, like this. But in that case, I will also have to change this one to the more general exception class, like this. Okay, but let's not do that at this moment. Let's add a new exception handler method to handle all other exceptions. So what I'll do, I'll simply copy this exception handler method. I'll paste it here, and instead of providing a specific exception that I want to handle, I will simply provide exception class. And I will rename my method. I'll call it handle other exceptions. And then I will also rename this argument to simply exception. And this is it. I can also customize the error message, but I will not do it. Otherwise, for other exceptions, I'll have a different error message structure returned. So by adding one more exception method class, we are now handling a specific exceptions like of user service exception class with this exception handler, and all other exceptions like it could be null pointer exception, number format exception with this method. And to demonstrate that, let me put a breakpoint here, and I will save this work and I'll go to user controller. And now instead of throwing user service exception, I will throw, let's say, a null pointer exception. This is just an example, and I will delete this message that we have here, and I will provide a hard-coded message like the object is null, like this. Again, this is just an example. We are not throwing null pointer exception is if the first name is empty. Okay, so I will save my work, and now I'll start my application and we will test it and see if we can handle this null pointer exception. I will debug it now. Okay, my application is up and running. I'll bring up Postman and I will send HTTP post request to create a new user. And let me delete the required field. First name is empty, so that exception is triggered. And I will send the request. And here we go. This is our breakpoint. And now notice we don't have a user exception triggered anymore. We have the other exception handler method that catches all other exceptions. And if I resume it and look at the response, here we have an error message response with the message description that we have hard-coded. The object is null. So we now know for sure that it was a null pointer exception that was handled by our code. Okay, so now you know how to handle a specific exception, and you know how to handle all other exceptions that you might have not thought about or that took place and are not handled by your exception handler methods.